Welcome, my friends, to an extraordinary journey through one of history's most fascinating yet often overlooked chapters. Today, we embark on a comprehensive exploration of Kievan Rus, the medieval state that laid the foundation for modern Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Over the next hour, we will witness the birth of a civilization that would span nearly 4 centuries, from the legendary arrival of Rurik in 862 to the devastating Mongol conquest in 1240. This is more than just a tale of kings and battles. It's the story of how Slavic tribes transformed from scattered communities into a unified empire that connected the Baltic to the Black Sea, embraced Christianity, and created one of medieval Europe's most sophisticated legal systems. We will explore how this remarkable state rose from humble beginnings to become a major European power, only to fragment and ultimately fall to one of history's most devastating invasions. Join me as we uncover the triumphs and tragedies, the brilliant leaders and fatal weaknesses that defined Kievan Rus, and discover how this ancient state's legacy continues to shape Eastern Europe today. The calling of the Vikings, Rurik, and the birth of a dynasty. In the mid-9th century, the vast forests and rivers of Eastern Europe were home to numerous Slavic tribes. The Ilmen Slavs around Lake Ilmen, the Krivichs along the upper Dnieper, and the Polyanians near modern-day Kiev. These tribes had developed thriving communities based on agriculture, crafts, and trade, but they lacked strong centralized leadership. Constant feuding between tribes and external pressures from neighboring peoples created a dangerous power vacuum. According to the primary chronicle, the oldest surviving historical record of these events, the situation became so dire that in 862, the Slavic and Finnic tribes made an unprecedented decision. They sent envoys across the Baltic Sea to the Varangians, Viking warriors known to the Slavs as the Rus, with a remarkable invitation. Our land is great and rich, but there is no order in it. Come and rule over us. The man who answered this call was Rurik, a Scandinavian chieftain whose origins remain shrouded in mystery. Some historians identify him with Rurik of Dorestad, a Danish Viking who had raided extensively in Western Europe. Others suggest he was a Swedish warrior merchant drawn by the lucrative trade routes connecting Scandinavia to Byzantium. Regardless of his exact origins, Rurik's arrival would prove to be one of history's most consequential moments. Rurik did not come alone. According to the chronicle, he arrived with his 2 brothers, Cineas, who settled among the Vez people at Beluzero, and Truvor, who established himself in Izborsk among the Krivichs. Rurik himself took control of Novgorod, the most important trading center in the region, strategically positioned to control the northern portion of the route from the Varangians to the Greeks, the vital trade artery connecting the Baltic and Black Seas. The new Varangian ruler quickly set about organizing his territories. He established a network of fortified settlements, created administrative structures, and most importantly, brought military expertise that the Slavic tribes desperately needed. Rurik's warriors, known as the Druzhina, formed an elite military unit that would become the backbone of early Russian statecraft. These weren't mere mercenaries, they were trusted companions who shared in both the dangers and rewards of rulership. Under Rurik's leadership, the northern Slavic lands experienced unprecedented stability. Trade flourished as Viking merchants established secure routes to Constantinople, bringing precious goods from the Byzantine Empire northward while exporting furs, amber, honey, and slaves southward. The fusion of Scandinavian military organization with Slavic agricultural communities created a unique political entity that combined the best elements of both cultures. However, Rurik's reign was relatively brief. When he died in 879, he left behind a young son, Igor, who was too young to rule effectively. The regency fell to Rurik's kinsman Oleg, a decision that would prove pivotal in shaping the future of Eastern Europe. This transfer of power established the principle of dynastic succession that would govern Russian politics for centuries to come. The Rurik dynasty that would rule various Russian principalities until the death of Ivan the Terrible's son in 1598. The calling of Rurik represented more than just a change in leadership. It was the beginning of a new civilization. The integration of Viking military prowess, administrative skills, and commercial networks with Slavic agricultural expertise and local knowledge created the foundation upon which Kievan Rus would be built. Within a generation, this northern kingdom would expand dramatically southward, setting the stage for the creation of one of medieval Europe's most powerful states. The Unification, or Oleg's creation of Kievan Rus. When Oleg assumed the regency for the young Igor in 879, he inherited not just a kingdom, but a vision. The northern territories around Novgorod were secure and prosperous, but they represented only a fraction of the potential that lay within reach. To the south, along the great river systems that connected the Baltic to the Black Sea, lay wealthy trading cities and fertile lands that could transform a regional power into a continental empire. Oleg, known to history as the Wise or the Seer, possessed the strategic brilliance necessary to realize this vision. Unlike many Viking leaders who were content with raiding and temporary conquests, Oleg understood the value of permanent political control over trade routes. He envisioned a unified state that would stretch from the northern forests to the Black Sea steppes, controlling the entire route from the Varangians to the Greeks. In 882, after carefully preparing his forces and securing his northern base, Oleg launched the campaign that would create Kievan Rus. Moving south with a formidable army of Vikings and Slavs, he systematically captured key positions along the Dnieper River. His first major victory came at Smolensk, an important trading center of the Krivich that controlled river traffic along the upper Dnieper. The capture of Smolensk demonstrated Oleg's military prowess while providing him with additional resources and manpower for the greater prize that lay ahead. The ultimate target of Oleg's campaign was Kiev, the largest and most prosperous city in the region. Kiev was not just another trading post. It was the key to controlling the entire southern portion of the trade route to Constantinople, commanding the approaches to the Black Sea and the Byzantine Empire. The city was ruled by two Varangian warlords, Askold and Dir, who had established their own principality independent of Novgorod's influence. The capture of Kiev required not just military force, but political cunning. According to the primary chronicle, Oleg employed a stratagem that would become legendary. Rather than attempting a direct assault on the well-fortified city, he concealed most of his warriors and approached Kiev with only a small party, claiming to be a merchant expedition bound for Constantinople. When Askold and Dir came to meet these supposed traitors, Oleg revealed his true identity and declared, "You are neither princes nor of princely stock, but I am of princely birth." He then presented the young Igor, demonstrating the legitimacy of his claim to rule all territories that had been under Rurik's authority. The confrontation was swift and decisive. Both Askold and Dir were killed, and Kiev submitted to Oleg's rule without the need for a prolonged siege. This victory was more than just a military conquest. It was the founding moment of Kievan Rus as a unified state. Oleg reportedly declared Kiev to be the mother of Russian cities, recognizing its central importance to his new realm. By establishing his capital in Kiev rather than remaining in Novgorod, Oleg demonstrated his understanding that true power in this region lay in controlling the southern trade routes and maintaining proximity to the wealthy Byzantine Empire. The unification of the northern and southern territories under Oleg's rule created something entirely new in Eastern Europe. For the first time, a single political authority controlled the entire length of the great river trade route from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. This gave Kievan Rus enormous economic advantages, as the state could now regulate and profit from the entire flow of commerce between Scandinavia and Byzantium. Oleg's administrative genius was evident in how he organized his expanded realm. Rather than attempting to rule directly from Kiev, he established a system of appointed governors and tribute collection that allowed local communities to maintain many of their traditional practices while ensuring loyalty to the central authority. This pragmatic approach to governance would become a hallmark of successful rule in Kievan Rus, balancing the need for unity with respect for local customs and autonomy. The new state's military capabilities were soon tested and proven. Oleg launched several successful campaigns against the Khazars, weakening their control over the eastern trade routes and expanding Kievan influence into the steppe regions. These victories not only brought wealth and prestige, but also demonstrated to neighboring peoples that Kievan Rus had become a major regional power, worthy of respect and fear. Perhaps most significantly, Oleg established diplomatic relations with the Byzantine Empire through a combination of military pressure and commercial negotiations. In 907 and 911, he led expeditions against Constantinople, not necessarily to conquer the great city, but to secure favorable trade agreements. These campaigns resulted in treaties that granted Kievan merchants privileged access to Byzantine markets, laying the foundation for the economic prosperity that would sustain the state for generations. By the time of Oleg's death in 912, he had transformed a collection of scattered Slavic tribes and Viking settlements into a unified state spanning much of Eastern Europe. The creation of Kievan Rus represented a remarkable achievement in medieval statecraft, combining military conquest with diplomatic skill, economic vision with political pragmatism. The foundation Oleg laid would support nearly 4 centuries of political development, cultural flowering, and territorial expansion. Trials and transformation, Igor's rule and Olga's regency. The transition from Oleg's brilliant leadership to Igor's rule in 912 marked the beginning of a new and challenging phase in Kievan Rus's development. Igor, now an adult but lacking his predecessor's military genius and diplomatic skill, faced the enormous task of maintaining the vast state that Oleg had created. The early years of Igor's reign revealed both the strengths and vulnerabilities of the young Kievan state. Igor's foreign policy was marked by ambitious but often unsuccessful military campaigns. Unlike Oleg's calculated expeditions that combined military pressure with diplomatic objectives, Igor's ventures were frequently driven by the immediate need for wealth and the desire to maintain his warriors' loyalty through conquest and plunder. His campaigns against Byzantium in 941 and 944 demonstrated both the military potential of Kievan Rus and the limitations of its strategic thinking. The 941 expedition was particularly disastrous. Igor assembled a massive fleet and army for an assault on Constantinople, but the Byzantines were well prepared, using their famous Greek fire, an incendiary weapon that could burn even on water. Byzantine naval forces destroyed much of Igor's fleet. The surviving Rus forces were forced to retreat, having suffered enormous losses without achieving any significant gains. This defeat not only cost Igor valuable military resources, but also damaged the prestige of Kievan Rus in the eyes of both enemies and allies. Learning from this failure, Igor's second campaign in 944 was conducted more cautiously. Rather than attempting another direct assault on Constantinople, he negotiated from a position of strength, securing a new commercial treaty that, while less favorable than Oleg's agreements, still provided important trade privileges for Kievan merchants. This compromise approach, though less glorious than outright victory, demonstrated a growing maturity in Kievan diplomacy. Domestically, Igor faced the constant challenge of maintaining control over the diverse peoples and territories that comprised Kievan Rus. The tribute system established by Oleg required regular collection expeditions known as poliudie, during which the prince and his retinue would travel throughout the realm, demanding payments from subject tribes. These expeditions were essential for maintaining the economic foundation of the state, but they also created opportunities for conflict with local populations who often viewed the tribute demands as excessive. It was during one such tribute collection expedition in 945 that Igor met his death in a manner that would have profound consequences for Kievan history. The Drevlians, a Slavic tribe living in the forests west of Kiev, had grudgingly accepted Kievan rule but resented the heavy tribute demands. When Igor arrived to collect their annual payment, they provided it reluctantly. However, influenced by his retinue's complaints that they possessed fewer riches than other princes' warriors, Igor made the fatal decision to return and demand additional tribute. The Drevlians' response was swift and brutal. Led by their Prince Mal, they ambushed Igor's smaller second expedition and killed the Kievan prince in a particularly gruesome manner. According to later chroniclers, they tied Igor between two bent trees and released them, tearing him apart. This assassination of a reigning prince was an unprecedented challenge to Kievan authority that demanded an equally unprecedented response. Igor's death left Kievan Rus in a precarious position. His heir, Svyatoslav, was still a child, making direct succession impossible. In this moment of crisis, power fell to Igor's widow, Olga, who assumed the regency in what would become one of the most remarkable periods in early Kievan history. Olga was not merely a placeholder ruler waiting for her son to come of age. She proved to be one of the most capable and influential leaders in the entire history of Kievan Rus. Olga's first priority was avenging her husband's death and reasserting Kievan authority over the rebellious Drevlians. What followed was a campaign of retribution that became legendary for its combination of strategic brilliance and ruthless execution. When the Drevlians, emboldened by their success in killing Igor, sent envoys to Kiev proposing that Olga marry their Prince Mal, she saw an opportunity for revenge disguised as diplomacy. According to the primary chronicle, Olga's revenge unfolded in a series of elaborately planned massacres. The first Drevlian embassy was buried alive in a boat after Olga had them carried in honor to their meeting. When a second delegation arrived, they were burned alive in a bathhouse that Olga had ordered heated for their comfort. Finally, Olga agreed to visit the Drevlians' capital for the wedding, but at the funeral feast for her husband, she had her warriors massacre the Drevlian nobles while they were drunk. The culmination of Olga's revenge came with the siege of Iskorostan, the Drevlian capital. When the city proved difficult to capture by conventional means, Olga reportedly used one of history's most ingenious stratagems. She demanded a modest tribute of 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each household in the city. When the birds were delivered, her soldiers attached burning materials to them and released them back to their nests. The resulting fires burned down the wooden city, forcing its surrender. These tales of Olga's revenge, while possibly embellished over time, served important political purposes. They demonstrated that attacks on the Kievan ruling family would be met with terrible retribution, helping to establish the psychological foundations of princely authority that would sustain the dynasty for centuries. More importantly, they established Olga herself as a ruler to be both respected and feared. Beyond revenge, Olga proved to be an exceptional administrator and reformer. She reorganized the tribute system that had led to her husband's death, establishing fixed amounts and regular collection schedules that reduced the potential for conflicts with subject populations. She created a network of administrative centers throughout the realm, improving communication and governance. These reforms laid the groundwork for the more sophisticated governmental structures that would develop under her successors. Perhaps most significantly, Olga became the first member of the Kievan ruling family to embrace Christianity. Around 957, she traveled to Constantinople, where she was baptized by the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII himself, taking the Christian name Helena. While her conversion did not immediately transform Kievan Rus into a Christian state, her son Svyatoslav remained a devoted pagan. It established important precedents and connections that would prove crucial when Christianity was eventually adopted as the state religion. Olga's regency lasted until approximately 964, when Svyatoslav came of age and began his own military campaigns. By that time, she had not only preserved the unity of Kievan Rus during a period of potential fragmentation, but had actually strengthened the state's institutions and expanded its international connections. Her combination of ruthless political calculation with administrative innovation established patterns of rulership that would influence Kievan politics for generations to come. The warrior prince, Svyatoslav's conquests and campaigns. When Svyatoslav Igorovich came of age and assumed full control of Kievan Rus around 964, he inherited a stable and well-organized state from his mother Olga's capable regency. However, the young prince possessed a temperament and vision entirely different from his predecessors. While Rurik had been a state builder, Oleg a unifier, and Igor a maintainer of existing structures, Svyatoslav was above all a warrior whose reign would be defined by constant military campaigns and territorial expansion. The primary chronicle describes Svyatoslav as the embodiment of the warrior ideal. He was swift as a leopard and fought many wars. When he went to war, he took neither wagons nor kettles, and boiled no meat, but cut off small strips of horseflesh, game, or beef, and ate it after roasting it on the coals. Nor did he have a tent, but he spread a piece of saddle cloth under him and set his saddle under his head. This ascetic military lifestyle was not merely personal preference, but a calculated political statement, demonstrating that Svyatoslav was first and foremost a military leader who shared the hardships of his warriors. Svyatoslav's first major campaign targeted the Khazar Khaganate, the powerful Jewish kingdom that controlled much of the Volga River basin and extracted tribute from many East Slavic tribes. The Khazars had been a significant rival to Kievan expansion for decades, controlling crucial trade routes and maintaining a network of fortified cities that blocked Kievan access to the Caspian Sea region. In 965, Svyatoslav launched a devastating campaign that would destroy Khazar power forever. The destruction of the Khazar state was swift and thorough. Svyatoslav's forces captured and destroyed the Khazar capital of Itil at the mouth of the Volga River, forcing the Khazar ruling elite to flee to islands in the river delta. His armies also conquered Sarkel, the great Khazar fortress on the Don River that had controlled the western approaches to the Khazar heartland. This city was renamed Belaya Veja, White Tower, and became a Kievan outpost that would remain under Rus control until the early 12th century. The elimination of Khazar power had profound consequences for the political geography of Eastern Europe. It opened the Volga trade routes to direct Kievan control, providing access to the wealthy markets of Central Asia and the Islamic world. It also removed a significant military threat to Kievan territories and eliminated a rival claimant to suzerainty over many Slavic and Finno-Ugric tribes. The campaign established Svyatoslav's reputation as one of the era's greatest military commanders and demonstrated that Kievan Rus had become the dominant power in Eastern Europe. However, Svyatoslav's ambitions extended far beyond securing Kievan borders or eliminating regional rivals. His next target was the First Bulgarian Empire, a powerful state in the Balkans that controlled important territories along the Danube River and maintained complex relationships with both Byzantium and the Western European powers. This campaign would prove to be the most significant and ultimately the most destructive of Svyatoslav's reign. The opportunity for intervention in Bulgarian affairs came in 967 when the Byzantine Emperor Nikephoros II Phocas, faced with Bulgarian resistance to Byzantine expansion, made a fateful decision to hire Svyatoslav as a mercenary. The Byzantines offered the Kievan prince 15,000 pounds of gold to attack Bulgaria, believing they could use Rus military power to weaken their Bulgarian neighbors without significant cost to themselves. This represented a serious miscalculation of both Svyatoslav's abilities and his territorial ambitions. Svyatoslav's invasion of Bulgaria in 967-968 exceeded all Byzantine expectations. Leading an army of 60,000 warriors, including thousands of Pecheneg mercenaries, he swiftly defeated Bulgarian forces and occupied much of northern Bulgaria. The conquest was so successful that Svyatoslav reportedly captured 80 Bulgarian cities and effectively controlled the entire Danube River region. Rather than returning to Kiev with his spoils as the Byzantines had expected, Svyatoslav announced his intention to establish his permanent residence at Pereyaslavets, Little Preslav, on the Danube. This decision revealed the full scope of Svyatoslav's vision for Kievan Rus. He reportedly declared, "I do not care to remain in Kiev, but should prefer to live in Pereyaslavets on the Danube, since that is the center of my realm, where all riches are concentrated: gold, silks, wine, and various fruits from Greece, silver, and horses from Hungary and Bohemia, and from Rus furs, wax, honey, and slaves." This statement demonstrated that Svyatoslav envisioned transforming Kievan Rus from a northern European power into a Balkan empire that would control the crossroads between Europe and Asia. The Byzantine response to Svyatoslav's success was swift and hostile. Realizing that they had created a far more dangerous enemy than they had intended to eliminate, the Byzantines orchestrated a Pecheneg attack on Kiev in 998. The siege of Kiev by these nomadic warriors forced Svyatoslav to abandon his Bulgarian conquests temporarily and return north to defend his homeland. The 968 siege of Kiev became one of the most dramatic episodes in early Kievan history. With Svyatoslav absent in Bulgaria, the city was defended by his mother Olga and his 3 young sons, Yaroslav, Oleg, and Vladimir. The siege created desperate conditions within the city, with the population suffering from hunger and thirst as the Pechenegs controlled the surrounding territories. According to the primary chronicle, the situation became so dire that Olga contemplated surrender rather than see the city destroyed. The resolution of the siege demonstrated both the loyalty Svyatoslav inspired in his followers and the effectiveness of Kievan military organization. General Pretich, stationed across the Dnieper River, initially hesitated to engage the larger Pecheneg force. However, when a young Kievan who spoke the Pecheneg language managed to swim across the river and alert Pretich to the city's desperate situation, the general launched an attack that convinced the Pechenegs that Svyatoslav himself was returning with his army. The siege was lifted, and Kiev was saved through a combination of courage, deception, and military skill. Svyatoslav's return to Kiev was followed by a final campaign in Bulgaria that would end in disaster. Determined to reclaim his Balkan territories, he launched a new invasion in 970, but this time faced the full military might of the Byzantine Empire under Emperor John Tzimiskes. The resulting war was brutal and decisive. After initial successes, Svyatoslav found himself besieged in the fortress of Dorostolon, modern Silistra, by a Byzantine army that had systematically recaptured Bulgarian territories. The siege of Dorostolon lasted for 3 months and demonstrated the military evolution that had occurred during Svyatoslav's campaigns. The Rus forces, originally organized around mobile cavalry tactics, had learned siege warfare and urban combat during their Bulgarian conquests. However, they were ultimately outmatched by Byzantine military engineering and the superior resources of the imperial army. Facing starvation and disease, Svyatoslav was forced to negotiate a withdrawal from Bulgarian territories in exchange for safe passage back to Kiev. Svyatoslav's retreat from Bulgaria marked the end of his imperial ambitions, but it also sealed his fate. On the return journey to Kiev in 972, his small retinue was ambushed by Pechenegs at the Dnieper Rapids. According to later accounts, the Pecheneg Khan Kuria killed Svyatoslav and had a drinking cup made from his skull, honoring him as a worthy adversary, while claiming his power through this ritual act. The great warrior prince, who had destroyed the Khazar Khaganate and nearly conquered Bulgaria, died far from home, a victim of the steppe warfare that had always threatened Kievan Rus. Svyatoslav's reign represented both the pinnacle of early Kievan military power and a cautionary tale about the limits of conquest-based expansion. His campaigns had eliminated major rivals, expanded Kievan influence across Eastern Europe, and demonstrated the state's capacity for large-scale military operations. However, his constant absence from Kiev and focus on distant conquests had also created vulnerabilities that enemies could exploit. The challenge for his successors would be consolidating these gains while building the internal strength necessary to sustain a great power. The Great Conversion, Vladimir the Fern, and the Christianization of Rus. The death of Svyatoslav in 972 left Kievan Rus facing one of the most serious succession crises in its history. The great warrior prince had established his three sons as rulers of different regions, Yaroslav in Kiev, Oleg among the Drevlians, and Vladimir in Novgorod, but had failed to create clear mechanisms for unified leadership after his death. What followed was a brutal civil war that threatened to tear apart the state that 4 generations of Rurik rulers had built. The conflict began when Yaroslav, as the eldest son and ruler of Kiev, attempted to assert his authority over his brothers. In 977, fighting broke out between Yaroslav and Oleg, resulting in Oleg's death and Yaroslav's annexation of Drevlian territories. Recognizing the threat to his own position, Vladimir fled from Novgorod to Scandinavia, where he assembled a force of Varangian warriors to reclaim his birthright. Vladimir's return in 980 marked the beginning of a campaign that would transform him from a fugitive prince into one of history's most significant rulers. Leading an army of Norse warriors supplemented by local supporters, he systematically defeated Yaroslav's forces and established control over Kiev. The final confrontation between the brothers ended with Yaroslav's assassination, orchestrated by Vladimir's agents during supposedly peaceful negotiations. By the end of 980, Vladimir had united all Kievan territories under his rule, but at the cost of enormous bloodshed and political trauma. The early years of Vladimir's reign were marked by aggressive military expansion and a deliberate revival of pagan religious practices. Unlike his grandmother Olga, who had embraced Christianity, Vladimir initially positioned himself as a champion of traditional Slavic beliefs. He erected a pantheon of pagan gods in Kiev's city center, with the thunder god Perun holding the place of honor. This religious policy served important political purposes, appealing to traditionalist elements within Kievan society, while distinguishing Vladimir's rule from Byzantine Christian influence. However, Vladimir's paganism was not merely conservative, it was actively militant. Historical accounts describe the introduction of human sacrifice into Kievan religious practices, with prisoners of war and selected citizens being offered to the gods in elaborate public ceremonies. These practices, borrowed from Baltic and Scandinavian traditions rather than indigenous Slavic customs, were intended to demonstrate both Vladimir's piety and his power. The psychological impact on both subjects and enemies was considerable, establishing Vladimir's reputation as a ruler who commanded both divine favor and terrible retribution. Vladimir's military campaigns during the 980s consolidated and expanded Kievan territories in all directions. He defeated the Vyatichi in the east, securing control over vital trade routes to the Volga region. His forces conquered the Yotvingians and other Baltic tribes in the northwest, extending Kievan influence toward the Baltic Sea. Most significantly, he launched successful campaigns against the Volga Bulgars and renewed conflicts with the Byzantine Empire, demonstrating that Kievan Rus remained a formidable military power despite the recent civil war. The turning point in Vladimir's reign came in the late 980s, when a combination of external pressures and internal considerations led him to reconsider his religious policies. The Byzantine Empire was facing a severe internal crisis, with rebel generals threatening the rule of Emperor Basil II. At the same time, Vladimir was dealing with diplomatic pressures from multiple directions as various neighboring powers sought to influence Kievan policy through religious conversion. According to the primary chronicle, Vladimir's consideration of different religions became one of the most famous episodes in medieval European history. In 986, representatives of various faiths arrived in Kiev to present their cases to the prince. Muslim Bulgars from the Volga region advocated for Islam, emphasizing its egalitarian principles and the rewards of paradise. Jewish Khazars, despite their recent defeat by Svyatoslav, sent envoys to promote Judaism. Catholic missionaries from the Holy Roman Empire argued for Roman Christianity, while Orthodox representatives from Byzantium presented the case for Eastern Christianity. Vladimir's reported responses to these various religious options revealed both his practical political thinking and his cultural preferences. He rejected Islam primarily because of its prohibition on alcohol, reportedly declaring that drinking is the joy of the Rus and that they could not exist without it. Judaism was dismissed partly because the Jewish people lacked a homeland of their own, which Vladimir interpreted as evidence of divine disfavor. Roman Catholicism was rejected due to political concerns about papal authority and theological differences with Byzantine Christianity. The decision in favor of Orthodox Christianity was influenced by multiple factors beyond Vladimir's personal preferences. The Byzantine Empire, despite its current troubles, remained the wealthiest and most sophisticated state in the region, making it an attractive political partner. Orthodox Christianity offered theological and liturgical traditions that seemed more compatible with Slavic cultural practices than Western Catholicism. Most importantly, the Byzantines were prepared to offer significant political and military advantages in exchange for Vladimir's conversion. The immediate catalyst for Vladimir's conversion came in 988, when Emperor Basil II requested military assistance against the rebel generals Bardas Sclerus and Bardas Phocas. Vladimir agreed to provide 6,000 Varangian warriors, a force that would prove decisive in preserving Basil's throne, but demanded unprecedented compensation. He requested the hand of Anna Porphyrogenita, Basil's sister, in marriage, something that had never before been granted to a barbarian ruler. The negotiations surrounding this marriage revealed the complexity of medieval diplomatic relationships. The Byzantines desperately needed Vladimir's military support, but were reluctant to grant such an unprecedented honor to a pagan prince. The compromise that emerged required Vladimir's conversion to Christianity as a precondition for the marriage, a requirement that served both political and religious purposes. Vladimir's baptism took place in Chersonesos, in Crimea, where he took the Christian name Basil in honor of his future brother-in-law. Vladimir's return to Kiev in 988 with his new Byzantine bride marked the beginning of the systematic Christianization of Kievan Rus. The process began with the dramatic destruction of the pagan pantheon that Vladimir had erected less than a decade earlier. The statue of Perun was dragged through the streets of Kiev and cast into the Dnieper River, symbolically demonstrating the triumph of the new faith over the old. Similar destructions of pagan shrines occurred throughout Kievan territories, often accompanied by the construction of Christian churches on the same sites. The mass baptism of Kiev's population became one of the most iconic scenes in Russian religious history. According to chroniclers, Vladimir ordered all citizens to gather at the Dnieper River, where Orthodox priests performed collective baptisms for thousands of people simultaneously. While this mass ceremony was primarily symbolic, true religious conversion required extensive education and cultural transformation. It established the official Christian identity of the Kievan state. Vladimir's promotion of Christianity extended far beyond ceremonial conversions. He launched an ambitious church-building program, beginning with the construction of Kiev's first stone church, the Church of the Tithes, in 989. This cathedral, built with Byzantine architects and craftsmen, was intended to serve as both a religious center and a symbol of the new Christian identity of Kievan Rus. Vladimir also established schools for the sons of nobles, ensuring that future generations of the ruling class would be educated in Christian theology and Byzantine culture. The impact of Christianization on Kievan society was profound and multifaceted. The adoption of Orthodox Christianity connected Kievan Rus to the broader Byzantine cultural sphere, introducing new forms of art, architecture, literature, and law. The establishment of a hierarchical church structure provided new mechanisms for social organization and political control. Most significantly, Christianity provided an ideological foundation for princely authority that was more sophisticated and durable than earlier pagan justifications for royal power. However, the Christianization process was not without challenges and resistance. Many Kievan subjects, particularly in rural areas and among non-Slavic populations, clung to traditional beliefs and practices. The synthesis of Christian and pagan elements that emerged created a distinctive form of popular religion that combined Orthodox theology with indigenous customs. This religious syncretism would remain a characteristic feature of Russian Christianity for centuries, influencing everything from folk literature to political ideology. Vladimir's reign also saw significant developments in law and administration that complemented his religious reforms. the prince established new legal procedures based on Byzantine models while maintaining traditional Slavic customs where they did not conflict with Christian principles. His court became a center of learning and cultural development, attracting scholars, artists, and craftsmen from throughout the Orthodox world. These cultural developments laid the groundwork for the intellectual and artistic achievements that would flourish under his successors. By the time of Vladimir's death in 1015, Kievan Rus had been transformed from a primarily pagan warrior state into a Christian kingdom that was fully integrated into medieval European civilization. His conversion to Christianity and subsequent promotion of the new faith created lasting cultural and political structures that would survive the eventual collapse of Kievan political unity. The foundation Vladimir laid would support not only the golden age of Kievan culture under his son Yaroslav, but also the later development of Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian national identities. The Golden Age, Yaroslav the Wise and Kievan Zenith. The death of Vladimir the Firm in 1015 plunged Kievan Rus into another devastating succession crisis that would test the strength of the institutions he had created. Vladimir had followed the traditional practice of appointing his sons as rulers of various principalities, but had failed to establish clear succession procedures for the grand princely throne of Kiev. The result was a brutal civil war between his sons that would last for several years and claim multiple lives before ending in the victory of Yaroslav Vladimirovich, who would become known to history as Yaroslav the Wise. The conflict began immediately after Vladimir's death when Svyatopolk, one of Vladimir's sons who may not have been his biological child, seized control of Kiev and began systematically eliminating his potential rivals. Svyatopolk's murders of his brothers, Boris and Gleb, became one of the most infamous episodes in early Russian history, both for their brutality and for their religious significance. These two princes, who reportedly accepted their deaths without resistance in accordance with Christian principles of nonviolence, were subsequently canonized as the first native saints of the Russian Orthodox Church. Yaroslav, who was ruling Novgorod at the time of his father's death, initially attempted to maintain his independence rather than directly challenging Svyatopolk for the Kievan throne. However, the systematic elimination of his brothers made clear that peaceful coexistence was impossible. In 1016, Yaroslav assembled an army of Novgorodians and Varangian mercenaries and marched south to confront Svyatopolk. The decisive battle took place at Lyubech, where Yaroslav's forces achieved a complete victory that forced Svyatopolk to flee to Poland. However, Svyatopolk's defeat did not end the succession struggle. With Polish support, he returned to challenge Yaroslav's rule, beginning a series of campaigns that continued until 1019. The final confrontation took place at the Battle of the Alta River, where Yaroslav decisively defeated the combined Polish Svyatopolk forces. Svyatopolk died during his retreat, and Yaroslav was finally able to establish secure control over the entire Kievan realm. Yaroslav's victory marked the beginning of what historians universally recognize as the golden age of Kievan Rus. Unlike his predecessors, who had focused primarily on military expansion and territorial conquest, Yaroslav combined effective military leadership with sophisticated political administration, cultural development, and legal innovation. His 45-year reign would see Kievan Rus reach its greatest extent, achieve its highest level of international prestige, and create its most lasting cultural achievements. The military accomplishments of Yaroslav's reign were substantial and decisive. His most significant victory came in 1036 with the defeat of the Pechenegs outside Kiev's walls. This nomadic confederation had threatened Kievan territories for decades, launching periodic raids that disrupted trade and agriculture throughout the southern regions of the state. Yaroslav's crushing victory not only eliminated the Pecheneg threat permanently, but also secured Kievan control over the steppe regions that connected the Black Sea trade routes to the forest zones of the north. The defeat of the Pechenegs had profound consequences for Kievan development. With the southern borders secure, resources that had previously been devoted to defense could be redirected toward internal development and cultural projects. Trade with Byzantium and other Mediterranean powers flourished, bringing unprecedented wealth into Kievan cities. Most importantly, the victory demonstrated to both subjects and foreign powers that Kievan Rus had achieved the military maturity necessary to dominate Eastern Europe. Yaroslav's domestic policies were equally transformative. He launched an ambitious program of urban development that transformed Kiev from a fortified trading post into one of medieval Europe's greatest cities. The centerpiece of this program was the construction of the Cathedral of St. Sophia, begun in 1037 to commemorate his victory over the Pechenegs. This magnificent structure, built by Byzantine architects, but incorporating distinctively Kievan elements, served as both a religious center and a symbol of the state's cultural sophistication. The St. Sophia Cathedral represented more than architectural achievement. It embodied Yaroslav's vision of Kiev as a rival to Constantinople itself. The cathedral's size, decoration, and liturgical program were all designed to demonstrate that Kievan Rus had achieved cultural parity with the Byzantine Empire. The building's educational and administrative functions made it a center of learning and governance that influenced political and intellectual development throughout Eastern Europe. Yaroslav's most enduring achievement was the creation of the Ruskaya Pravda, the first comprehensive legal code in Eastern European history. This remarkable document established legal procedures and principles that would influence Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian law for centuries. Unlike many medieval legal codes that were primarily collections of royal pronouncements, the Ruskaya Pravda represented a systematic attempt to codify existing customary law while introducing new concepts derived from Byzantine legal theory. The Ruskaya Pravda addressed virtually every aspect of legal life in Kievan society. It established procedures for criminal prosecution, civil disputes, commercial transactions, and inheritance rights. The code's treatment of different social classes was sophisticated and nuanced, recognizing the rights of various groups while maintaining social hierarchy. Most significantly, the Ruskaya Pravda introduced the principle of monetary compensation for crimes rather than physical punishment, representing a remarkably progressive approach to justice for its time. The development of the Ruskaya Pravda reflected broader changes in Kievan society under Yaroslav's rule. The state had evolved from a warrior confederation focused on raiding and tribute collection into a complex political system that required sophisticated legal institutions. The growing importance of trade, craft production, and urban life created new forms of social relationships that needed legal regulation. The Ruskaya Pravda provided the framework necessary to manage these developments while maintaining political stability. Yaroslav's cultural policies were equally significant in establishing Kievan Rus as a major European power. He promoted education and learning, establishing schools, and encouraging the translation of religious and secular texts from Greek into Church Slavonic. His court became a center of intellectual activity that attracted scholars and artists from throughout the Orthodox world. The development of Kievan literature, art, and architecture during his reign created cultural traditions that would influence Eastern European development for centuries. Perhaps most remarkably, Yaroslav established Kievan Rus as a major player in European dynastic politics through an ambitious program of international marriages. His daughters married the kings of France, Hungary, and Norway, while his sons married into the royal families of Poland and Byzantium. These marriages were not merely diplomatic gestures, but represented genuine recognition of Kievan Rus as an equal partner in European political relationships. The marriage of Yaroslav's daughter Anna to King Henry I of France was particularly significant. Anna was reportedly more educated than her husband and served as an influential advisor in French political affairs. Her signature on French royal documents, written in Cyrillic letters rather than Latin, served as a visible reminder of Kievan cultural sophistication in the heart of Western Europe. These royal marriages created lasting diplomatic relationships that enhanced Kievan's security and prestige throughout Yaroslav's reign. Yaroslav's administrative achievements were equally impressive. He reformed the governmental structures inherited from his predecessors, creating more efficient systems for tax collection, military organization, and judicial administration. His appointment of governors to major cities established clearer lines of authority while maintaining local autonomy in matters that did not affect central government interests. These administrative innovations provided the foundation for effective governance of the vast territories that comprised Kievan Rus. The reign of Yaroslav the Wise represented the culmination of nearly 2 centuries of Kievan development. Under his leadership, the state that had begun as a collection of Viking trading posts and Slavic agricultural communities achieved the political, military, cultural, and economic maturity necessary to rank among medieval Europe's great powers. The legal, educational, architectural, and diplomatic achievements of his reign created lasting legacies that would survive the eventual fragmentation of Kievan political unity. However, even Yaroslav's remarkable achievements could not solve the fundamental problem that would ultimately destroy Kievan Rus as a unified state. The succession system that he inherited and perpetuated, based on lateral succession from brother to brother and then to the eldest nephew, worked effectively when the ruling family was small and relationships were clear. But as the Rurik dynasty expanded and relationships became more complex, this system would create insurmountable conflicts that would tear the state apart. When Yaroslav died in 1054, he left behind a testament that divided Kievan territories among his 5 surviving sons. This division was intended to maintain family unity, providing each prince with adequate resources. Instead, it created the foundation for the feudal fragmentation that would begin almost immediately after his death and ultimately destroy the unified Kievan state. The fracturing of unity, feudal fragmentation, and decline. The death of Yaroslav the Wise in 1054 marked the end of the unified Kievan state and the beginning of a period of fragmentation that would ultimately prove fatal to the realm's independence. Yaroslav's testament, which divided his territories among his 5 surviving sons, was intended to prevent the succession conflicts that had plagued earlier transitions of power. Instead, it institutionalized the division of Kievan Rus into competing principalities that would spend the next century and a half fighting each other rather than confronting external threats. The fundamental problem lay in the contradiction between the traditional succession system and the growing complexity of the Rurik dynasty. The Rota system, which had worked reasonably well when the ruling family was small, became increasingly unworkable as the number of princes multiplied. By the late 11th century, dozens of Rurik princes had legitimate claims to various thrones, creating a situation where every succession generated multiple conflicts. Yaroslav's sons initially attempted to maintain some semblance of unity through collective decision-making and coordinated military campaigns. However, the system began to break down almost immediately after their father's death. The first major crisis occurred in 1068 when a coalition of Kievan princes suffered a devastating defeat at the hands of the Cumans, Polovtsians, at the Battle of the Alta River. This military disaster not only demonstrated the vulnerability of the fragmented Kievan forces, but also triggered popular uprisings in Kiev and other cities. The aftermath of the Cuman victory revealed the depth of political instability that fragmentation had created. Grand Prince Svyatoslav Yaroslavich was forced to flee to Poland when Kiev's population rose in revolt against his failed military leadership. His eventual return with Polish military support only deepened the crisis, as it demonstrated that Kievan princes were willing to use foreign armies against their own people and brothers. This precedent would be repeated numerous times over the following decades as princes regularly sought external support in their dynastic conflicts. The Council of Lubesh in 1097 represented a desperate attempt by the princes to restore some order to the deteriorating situation. Under the leadership of Vladimir II Monomach, the most capable of Yaroslav's grandsons, The assembled princes agreed to the principle that everyone shall keep his patrimony. This agreement was intended to end the constant warfare by establishing clear hereditary rights to specific territories. Instead, it formalized the fragmentation of Kievan Rus into a collection of independent principalities. The Lubeck Agreement created several major political centers that would dominate the following period. The Principality of Kiev retained nominal supremacy and control over the richest agricultural regions. The Principality of Chernigov controlled the eastern territories and trade routes to the steppe regions. The Vladimir Suzdal Principality emerged as the dominant power in the northeastern forests. The Principality of Galicia-Volhynia controlled the southwestern territories, with access to Central European trade routes. Novgorod developed into an autonomous republic with its own unique political institutions. Each of these principalities developed its own distinct characteristics and political culture. Kiev struggled to maintain its traditional supremacy, but was weakened by constant warfare and the diversion of trade routes. Chernigov became increasingly involved in steppe politics, often allying with Cuman groups against other Rus principalities. Vladimir Suzdal emerged as the most militarily powerful principality, with ambitious princes who sought to dominate their neighbors. Galicia-Volhynia developed strong connections to Poland and Hungary, creating a distinct Western orientation. The transformation of Novgorod into a merchant republic represented perhaps the most innovative political development of this period. Unlike the other principalities which remained under princely rule, Novgorod developed a unique system based on the vesh, popular assembly, and elected officials. The prince in Novgorod served primarily as a military commander with limited authority over internal affairs. This system allowed Novgorod to maintain stability and prosperity even as other Kievan territories were devastated by constant warfare. The economic consequences of fragmentation were severe and long-lasting. The unity of the great trade route, from the Varangians to the Greeks, was broken as different principalities imposed their own customs and regulations. Constant warfare disrupted agricultural production and urban development. The decline of Constantinople as a trading partner further reduced the economic foundations that had sustained Kievan prosperity. By the early 12th century, the once great trade route that had created Kievan Rus was no longer economically viable. Military fragmentation proved even more disastrous than economic division. The unified Kievan army that had defeated the Pechenegs and challenged Byzantium was replaced by numerous smaller forces that were often at war with each other. This military weakness invited external intervention from neighboring powers. The Cumans became the dominant force in the southern steppes, regularly raiding Rus territories and selling their services to competing princes. Polish, Hungarian, and Lithuanian forces frequently intervened in Rus affairs, usually at the invitation of one faction or another. The period from 1100 to 1200 saw the gradual eclipse of Kiev as the center of Rus political life. The city suffered devastating attacks from rival princes in 1169 and 1203, when it was sacked by armies led by Andrei Bogolyubsky, of Vladimir Suzdal and Rurik Rostislavich, respectively. These attacks were particularly shocking because they represented not external conquest, but internal warfare between Rus princes. The sack of Kiev in 1169 marked a symbolic end to the city's claim to supremacy over all Rus lands. The rise of the Vladimir Suzdal Principality as the dominant Rus power reflected broader changes in the political geography of Eastern Europe. The northeastern forests, once considered peripheral territories suitable only for younger sons, had become the most economically and militarily powerful region. Princes like Andrei Bogolyubsky and Vsevolod the Big Nest built strong centralized states that could effectively challenge traditional Kievan authority. The transfer of political supremacy from Kiev to Vladimir represented a fundamental shift in the balance of power within the Rus world. The Fragmentation period also saw important cultural and religious developments that would have lasting significance. Each principality developed its own literary and artistic traditions while maintaining connection to the broader Orthodox cultural sphere. The construction of magnificent cathedrals in Vladimir, Novgorod, Pskov, and other cities demonstrated that cultural sophistication was no longer concentrated in Kiev. The development of distinctive regional styles in architecture, icon painting, and manuscript illumination reflected the growing diversity within Rus civilization. However, these cultural achievements could not compensate for the fundamental political and military weaknesses that fragmentation had created. By 1200, Kievan Rus had ceased to exist as a meaningful political entity. In its place stood a collection of competing principalities that shared a common heritage but lacked the unity necessary to confront major external threats. The stage was set for the catastrophic Mongol invasion that would destroy most of these principalities and end the independence of the Rus lands. The Battle of Lipitsa in 1216 perfectly exemplified the destructive nature of the conflicts that consumed Rus energies during this period. This battle, fought between members of the Vsevolodovich dynasty over control of the Vladimir Suzdal Principality, was one of the largest military encounters in Rus history. The forces of Mstislav the Bold and Constantine Vsevolodovich defeated those of Yuri and Yaroslav Vsevolodovich in a conflict that cost thousands of lives and devastated the most powerful Rus principality. The battle demonstrated both the military capabilities that the Rus princes retained and the tragic waste of these capabilities in fratricidal warfare. The irony of the fragmentation period was that individual Rus principalities often achieved remarkable success in isolation. The Vladimir Suzdal princes expanded their territories and built magnificent cities. Novgorod developed into one of medieval Europe's wealthiest trading centers. Galicia-Volhynia established itself as a significant regional power with influence extending into Central Europe. However, these individual achievements came at the cost of collective strength and security that would prove fatal when faced with coordinated external invasion. As the 13th century dawned, the fragmented Rus principalities remained focused on their internal conflicts, unaware that a threat unlike any they had previously faced was gathering strength in the distant steppes of Mongolia. The unity that Oleg had created, that Vladimir had Christianized, and that Yaroslav had brought to its golden age, had been sacrificed to dynastic ambitions and regional interests. The consequences of this fragmentation would soon become tragically apparent when the Mongol armies began their westward advance. The storm from the east, Mongol conquest, and the end of an era. In 1223, the fragmented princes of Kievan Rus received their first warning of the approaching catastrophe that would destroy their world. A massive army, unlike any they had previously encountered, appeared in the southern steppes. Having emerged from the vast expanses of Central Asia with a speed and coordination that defied contemporary understanding of warfare. This was the advance guard of the Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous land empire in human history, and its arrival on the borders of the Rus principalities marked the beginning of the end for medieval Kievan civilization. The first encounter between the Rus and the Mongols occurred at the Battle of the Kalka River on May 31st, 1223. This confrontation arose not from direct Mongol aggression against Rus territories, but from a complex web of steppe politics involving the Cumans, the nomadic confederation that had dominated the southern steppes for over a century. The Cumans, facing annihilation by the advancing Mongol forces under generals Jebe and Subutai, appealed to their frequent enemies, the Rus princes, for military assistance. The Cuman appeal presented the Rus princes with a strategic dilemma that they failed to fully comprehend. Mstislav the Bold of Galicia, one of the most powerful princes of his generation, argued for intervention by declaring, "If we do not help them now, they will surrender to the Mongols, and then they will have greater strength against us." This reasoning was strategically sound, but grossly underestimated the nature of the threat that the Mongols represented. The coalition that assembled to face the Mongols represented one of the largest military efforts in Rus history. Forces from Kiev, Galicia, Volhynia, Chernigov, and other principalities joined with Cuman warriors to create an army that may have numbered 80,000 men. The participation of multiple princes who had previously been enemies demonstrated the perceived seriousness of the Mongol threat. However, the coalition also revealed the fundamental weaknesses that fragmentation had created in Rus military organization. The campaign began promisingly for the Rus-Cuman alliance. The coalition forces crossed the Dnieper River and advanced into the steppe regions, initially achieving some success against Mongol advance units. However, these early victories proved to be deliberate Mongol tactical withdrawals designed to draw the Rus forces deeper into unfavorable terrain, where their superior cavalry could be employed most effectively. The Battle of the Kalka River itself was a catastrophic defeat for the Rus-Cuman alliance. The Mongol forces, numbering perhaps 25,000 warriors, used sophisticated tactical coordination and superior mobility to systematically destroy the much larger but poorly coordinated Allied army. The Cumans fled from the battlefield early in the engagement, creating confusion and gaps in the Allied battle line that the Mongols exploited with devastating effectiveness. The destruction of the Rus forces was nearly complete. 6 princes were killed in the battle, including Mstislav of Kiev and Mstislav of Chernigov, along with thousands of warriors who represented the military elite of their respective principalities. Alexander Popovich, a legendary bogatyr, heroic warrior, whose exploits were celebrated in epic songs, died alongside his companions, symbolizing the end of an era of Rus military prowess. Only Mstislav the Bold and a few other commanders managed to escape the slaughter. Perhaps most ominously, the Mongols demonstrated a level of cruelty that shocked even the violence-accustomed Rus princes. The captured Prince Mstislav of Kiev and his retinue were executed by being crushed under a wooden platform on which the Mongol commanders held their victory feast. This treatment of captured royalty violated all contemporary conventions of warfare and served as a deliberate psychological weapon designed to terrorize future opponents. Despite the magnitude of their victory, the Mongols withdrew eastward after the Battle of the Kalka River, leaving the surviving Rus principalities to contemplate their narrow escape. This withdrawal was not a sign of weakness, but reflected the limited objectives of what had been primarily a reconnaissance expedition. The Mongol commanders had achieved their goals of eliminating Cuman resistance and assessing the military capabilities of potential future targets. The information they gathered would prove invaluable when the full-scale invasion began 14 years later. The years between 1223 and 1237 represented a missed opportunity of historic proportions for the Rus principalities. The devastating defeat at the Kalka River should have served as a warning that prompted military reform, political unification, and strategic preparation for the return of the Mongols. Instead, the princes reverted to their traditional conflicts and rivalries, apparently convinced that the Mongol threat had passed. The fragmentation that had weakened Kievan Rus continued unabated, leaving the principalities as vulnerable to coordinated attack as they had been before the Battle of the Kalka River. The resumption of the Mongol westward expansion began in 1237 under the leadership of Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan and commander of what became known as the Golden Horde. Unlike the earlier expedition, this was not a reconnaissance mission, but a full-scale invasion designed to conquer and permanently occupy all Rus territories. The Mongol army that crossed the Volga River in the winter of 1237 was a perfectly organized military machine that combined tactical brilliance with strategic patience and administrative sophistication. The first target of Batu's invasion was the Principality of Ryazan, chosen because it was relatively isolated and could be conquered without immediate intervention from other Rus principalities. The speed and efficiency of the Mongol assault shocked contemporary observers. Despite desperate appeals for assistance from Kiev and other principalities, Ryazan's Prince Yuri Igorovich received minimal support. The city fell on December 16, 1237, after a brief siege that demonstrated the Mongols' mastery of siege warfare. The destruction of Ryazan established the pattern that would be repeated throughout the invasion. The Mongols offered terms to cities that surrendered immediately, though these terms still involved heavy tribute and the incorporation of local forces into the Mongol military system. Cities that resisted were subjected to complete destruction, with their populations killed or enslaved and their buildings burned. This systematic use of terror was a deliberate strategic choice designed to minimize future resistance. From Ryazan, the Mongol forces moved swiftly northward toward the Grand Principality of Vladimir Suzdal, the most powerful remaining Rus state. Grand Prince Yuri II Vsevolodovich made the fatal mistake of dividing his forces, sending his son Vsevolod with a portion of the army to assist Ryazan, while attempting to gather additional troops for a larger defensive effort. This division of forces ensured that neither defensive effort would be strong enough to resist the concentrated Mongol assault. The Battle of Kolomna in early January 1238 resulted in the destruction of the combined Ryazan-Vladimir forces and the death of the experienced voyevoda Yeremy Glebovich. The defeat opened the direct route to Moscow, which fell after a brief siege, and then to Vladimir itself. The speed of the Mongol advance gave the defending forces no time to coordinate an effective response. By February 1238, Mongol forces were besieging Vladimir, the most powerful city in northeastern Rus. The siege of Vladimir demonstrated both the sophistication of Mongol military technology and the devastating consequences of Rus political fragmentation. While Batu Khan's main force besieged the city, other Mongol units systematically conquered surrounding towns and fortresses, preventing any possibility of relief. Grand Prince Yuri, who had left Vladimir to gather additional forces, was unable to return before the city fell on February 7, 1238. The royal family, including Yuri's wife and children, died when the Dormition Cathedral, where they had sought refuge, was burned by the Mongol assault. The final destruction of organized resistance in northeastern Rus came at the Battle of the Sit River on March 4th, 1238. Grand Prince Yuri's hastily assembled army was surrounded and destroyed by Mongol forces under the command of Burundai. Yuri himself was killed in the battle, and his decapitated body was later found on the battlefield by Bishop Kirill of Rostov. With the death of the Grand Prince and the destruction of his army, organized resistance in the Vladimir Suzdal Principality effectively ended. The Mongol conquest of northeastern Rus was completed with remarkable speed and efficiency. Within less than 2 months, the most powerful Rus principality had been completely destroyed as an independent political entity. The systematic nature of the destruction was unprecedented in Rus experience. Cities like Rostov, Yaroslavl, Moscow, and Tver were captured and burned. The sophisticated administrative structures that had taken centuries to develop were dismantled. The cultural achievements of the Vladimir Suzdal Principality, including its magnificent stone churches and extensive libraries, were largely destroyed. After completing the conquest of northeastern Rus, Batu Khan turned his attention to the southern principalities and ultimately to Kiev itself. The attack on Kiev, which began in the autumn of 1240, represented the symbolic end of Kievan Rus as a political entity. The city that had once been called the mother of Russian cities and had rivaled Constantinople in its wealth and sophistication was now an isolated fortress facing the full might of the Mongol Empire. The siege of Kiev was notable for both its military sophistication and its cultural significance. The Mongols employed advanced siege engines, including catapults and battering rams, that quickly breached the city's ancient fortifications. Prince Michael of Kiev had fled before the siege began, leaving the defense to the voivoda Dmitry, who organized a heroic but ultimately feudal resistance. The psychological impact of seeing Kiev under siege was enormous for the remaining Rus principalities, as it represented the final collapse of the political order that had existed for nearly 4 centuries. The fall of Kiev on December 6, 1240 marked the formal end of Kievan Rus as an independent state. The Mongol assault was particularly devastating because it targeted not just the city's military defenses, but its cultural and religious institutions. The Cathedral of St. Sophia, Yaroslav the Wise's magnificent symbol of Kievan achievement, was damaged, though not completely destroyed. The Church of the Tithes, Vladimir I's first stone church and the symbol of Kievan Christianity, was reportedly destroyed when its roof collapsed under the weight of refugees seeking sanctuary. The destruction of Kiev's population was systematic and brutal. Contemporary accounts describe the city as being left nearly deserted after the Mongol conquest, with only a few hundred houses remaining inhabited. The Italian traveler Giovanni da Pian del Carpine, who passed through Kiev 6 years after its fall, reported seeing countless skulls and bones scattered around the city. This physical destruction was accompanied by the systematic elimination of the political and cultural elite who had maintained Kievan traditions. The Mongol conquest of Kievan Rus was completed with the subjugation of the remaining southern principalities in 1240-1241. Galicia Volhynia, the last major center of resistance, was conquered despite the efforts of Prince Daniel Romanovich to organize effective opposition. The speed and completeness of the Mongol victory demonstrated the fundamental military and political weaknesses that fragmentation had created in the former Kievan territories. The establishment of Mongol rule over the former Kievan territories marked the beginning of a new era in Eastern European history. The Golden Horde, the Mongol successor state that controlled the Rus principalities, established a tribute system that extracted enormous wealth from the conquered territories. The political autonomy that had characterized Rus development for centuries was replaced by a system of indirect rule that maintained local princes as tribute collectors and administrative agents. The cultural and religious traditions of Kievan Rus survived, but within a fundamentally altered political context that would shape Eastern European development for the next 2.5 centuries. The final echoes, Daniel of Galicia and the end of independence. The Mongol conquest of 1237-1240 had effectively ended Kievan Rus as an independent political entity, but the final chapter of resistance and adaptation would be written by one of the most remarkable figures of the period, Daniel Romanovich of Galicia Volhynia. In the aftermath of the devastating invasions that had destroyed most Rus principalities, Daniel emerged as the last significant leader to challenge Mongol supremacy and attempt to restore some semblance of Kievan independence. His efforts, though ultimately unsuccessful, represented the final assertion of the political traditions that had sustained Kievan Rus for nearly 4 centuries. Daniel's position in the post-Conquest period was unique among surviving Rus princes. As ruler of Galicia Volhynia, the southwestern principality that had maintained the strongest connections to Western Europe, he possessed both the resources and the strategic location necessary to attempt resistance to Mongol rule. His principality had been less severely damaged by the initial Mongol invasions than the northeastern territories, and its proximity to Poland and Hungary offered potential sources of military and diplomatic support. Most importantly, Daniel himself was an experienced military commander who had participated in the complex struggles that characterized the late Kievan period. The immediate aftermath of the Mongol conquest presented Daniel with an apparently impossible situation. The traditional political structure of Kievan Rus had been destroyed, with most major cities burned and their populations killed or enslaved. The tribute system imposed by the Golden Horde demanded resources that would prevent any significant military buildup. Most surviving Rus princes had submitted to Mongol authority and were serving as tribute collectors for their new overlords. Resistance seemed not only futile, but potentially suicidal. Despite these overwhelming obstacles, Daniel initially chose the path of resistance rather than submission. He refused to travel to the Mongol capital to receive formal confirmation of his authority, as other surviving princes had done. Instead, he attempted to organize a coalition of surviving Rus territories and Western allies that might challenge Mongol domination. This decision reflected both his personal courage and his understanding that acceptance of Mongol rule would mean the permanent end of Rus independence. Daniel's resistance strategy was sophisticated and multifaceted. Militarily, he attempted to rebuild his army while avoiding direct confrontation with major Mongol forces. Diplomatically, he sought support from Pope Innocent IV and other Western leaders, even agreeing to consider church union as the price of Catholic military assistance. Economically, he attempted to rebuild his war-torn territories while minimizing tribute payments to the Golden Horde. Most importantly, he tried to maintain the cultural and political traditions of Kievan Rus in the face of overwhelming pressure to accept Mongol administrative systems. The diplomatic aspect of Daniel's resistance efforts was particularly complex and ultimately tragic. In 1245, he received papal representatives who offered to recognize him as King of Rus in exchange for accepting Catholic Christianity and acknowledging papal supremacy. This offer represented a fundamental choice between Eastern and Western orientations that would influence Eastern European development for centuries. Daniel's eventual acceptance of the royal crown in 1253, while maintaining Orthodox Christianity in practice, demonstrated both his desperation for Western support and his commitment to preserving some form of Rus independence. However, the Western support that Daniel had hoped to receive proved largely illusory. The Catholic powers of Europe were preoccupied with their own conflicts and showed little genuine interest in mounting a major campaign against the Mongols. The promises of military assistance that had accompanied Daniel's coronation as king were not fulfilled. The papal crown that was supposed to symbolize Western recognition of his authority became instead a reminder of the isolation that characterized his position. The military reality of Daniel's situation became increasingly apparent as Mongol pressure intensified during the 1250s. Despite his efforts to avoid direct confrontation, Mongol forces periodically ravaged his territories to remind him of their power. The tribute demands imposed by the Golden Horde continued to drain resources that might have been used for military preparation. Most devastatingly, Daniel's attempts to build fortifications and reorganize his military forces were detected by Mongol intelligence networks and met with swift retaliation. The turning point in Daniel's resistance came in 1258-1259, when Burundai, the Mongol general who had destroyed the army of Vladimir 20 years earlier, led a campaign specifically designed to force Daniel's complete submission. This expedition was not a conquest campaign like the earlier invasions, but a carefully planned operation to eliminate the last center of potential resistance to Mongol rule. Burundai's demands were precise and humiliating. Daniel must personally participate in Mongol military campaigns, destroy his fortifications, and acknowledge complete subordination to the Golden Horde. Faced with the choice between total destruction and complete submission, Daniel chose survival. He agreed to Burundai's demands, personally supervised the destruction of his own fortifications, and accepted the role of a Mongol vassal. This submission marked the end of organized resistance to Mongol rule in the former Kievan territories. The last prince who had maintained the pretense of independence was reduced to the same status as other Rus rulers who served as tribute collectors for their Mongol overlords. The personal tragedy of Daniel's submission was accompanied by broader changes that definitively ended the Kievan political system. The tribute system imposed by the Golden Horde created new forms of economic and political organization that bore little resemblance to traditional Kievan structures. The regular census-taking and administrative oversight imposed by Mongol officials eliminated the autonomy that had characterized Rus principalities. Most importantly, the constant threat of military intervention made independent political initiative impossible. The cultural consequences of Daniel's defeat were equally significant. The synthesis of Orthodox Christianity and Rus political traditions that had defined Kievan civilization was forced to adapt to the reality of permanent foreign domination. The literary and artistic achievements that had flourished during the Kievan period gave way to more modest cultural expressions that reflected the reduced circumstances of Rus society. The international connections that had made Kievan Rus a significant European power were severed as the surviving principalities became isolated tributaries of the Golden Horde. Daniel's death in 1264 marked the symbolic end of the Kievan era. His successors would rule diminished territories under constant Mongol supervision, more closely resembling provincial governors than independent princes. The Galicia-Volhynia Principality, which had been the last bastion of Rus independence, would eventually be absorbed by Poland and Lithuania. The political unity that Oleg had created in 882 was permanently destroyed, replaced by a system of competing successor states that would develop their own distinct identities over the following centuries. The establishment of the Golden Horde's tribute system represented more than a change of political control. It was the creation of an entirely new form of political organization. The Mongol administrative system was more centralized and efficient than anything that had existed during the Kievan period. Regular taxation, systematic record keeping, and professional administrative personnel replaced the relatively informal structures that had characterized Kievan governance. While this system was oppressive and exploitative, it also created the foundation for the more centralized states that would eventually emerge in the region. The long-term consequences of the Mongol conquest and Daniel's failed resistance would shape Eastern European development for centuries. The destruction of Kievan unity created the conditions for the emergence of separate Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian national identities. The tribute system established patterns of autocratic governance that would influence political development in all successor states. The cultural synthesis that had characterized Kievan Rus was preserved but transformed, creating the foundation for distinct traditions that would eventually contribute to multiple national cultures. By 1264, the transformation was complete. The state that had begun with Rurik's arrival in 862 and had reached its zenith under Yaroslav the Wise had ceased to exist as an independent political entity. In its place stood a collection of tribute-paying principalities that maintained some local autonomy, but lacked the unity and independence that had defined Kievan Rus. The golden age of Eastern Slavic political development had ended, but its legacy would continue to influence the region's development for centuries to come. The enduring legacy of Kievan Rus. As our journey through the rise and fall of Kievan Rus comes to an end, we stand witness to one of history's most remarkable tales of creation, achievement, and ultimate transformation. For nearly 4 centuries, from Rurik's arrival in 862 to the final submission of Daniel of Galicia in the 1260s, this medieval state shaped the destiny of Eastern Europe and laid the foundation for the modern nations of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. The story of Kievan Rus demonstrates how a collection of scattered Slavic tribes and Viking adventurers could unite to create one of medieval Europe's great powers. Under the leadership of visionary rulers like Oleg the Wise, Vladimir the Great, and Yaroslav the Wise, this state achieved remarkable military victories, cultural sophistication, and diplomatic influence. The conversion to Christianity, the creation of the Ruskaya Pravda, and the construction of magnificent cathedrals represented achievements that rivaled those of any contemporary European kingdom. Yet the same political structures that enabled Kievan Rus's rise ultimately contributed to its downfall. The succession system that had worked effectively for a small ruling family became a source of endless conflict as the dynasty expanded. The fragmentation that began after Yaroslav's death created vulnerabilities that external enemies could exploit. The Mongol conquest of 1237-1240 was devastating, not just because of Mongol military superiority, but because it encountered a divided and weakened collection of principalities rather than a unified state. The legacy of Kievan Rus extends far beyond its political boundaries or temporal existence. The Orthodox Christianity that Vladimir introduced became a defining characteristic of Eastern Slavic civilization. The legal traditions established in the Russkaya Pravda influenced jurisprudence throughout the region for centuries. The architectural and artistic achievements of the Kievan period created cultural templates that would inspire later generations. Most importantly, the very concept of a unified Eastern Slavic state established political ideals that would repeatedly resurface in later historical periods. The end of Kievan Rus did not represent the disappearance of its people or culture, but rather their transformation under new political circumstances. The principalities that survived Mongol conquest maintained many Kievan traditions while adapting to the realities of tributary status. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania preserved Kievan legal and cultural traditions in its western